Hi, folks. It's time to talk about the deeper truths of David and Goliath, a story that lots of people are familiar with, but there are quite a few deeper points here that bear resting out of the story. It's often known as a David and Goliath story is become proverbial of where the little guy beats the big guy, beyond all guesses, beyond all expectation. The little guy wins over the big guy. Well, that's kind of what happened, but guess what? The Bible is full of those stories. And this is by far not the only one, and some could argue not the best one, even, to illustrate that point. But be that as it may, that point is illustrated here. The little guy beats the big guy because, as David says, the battle belongs to the Lord, and the Lord saves not by sword or shield. Not by sword or spear, whatever David says. He actually says that in the battle. We often forget that David and Goliath made speeches at one another, and David's confession of faith in the Lord's power and in the Lord's will is right there. And that's what we should rest ourselves on. That the Lord wins the battle not by the strength of human power, but by his own will, but by his own powers. So, of course, what's the story? What goes on here? David is sent to the front lines of the army not as a soldier. That's made very clear. He's sent simply as the brother of some soldiers. His father sends him to go bring some refreshments to his brothers who are on the front lines. And he finds that this war has taken a turn where it's not going to be an all-out battle of one army against another, but they're going to send out champions, right? I think we saw this on, what's that movie? Troy is a good example. Well, that's kind of an older movie by now, but Achilles and the other guy, they stand out there, and whoever wins wins. The whole team wins. You don't have to kill as many people that way. You can instead make them your slaves. And so Goliath says that send out King Saul. Essentially, where is King Saul? Where's the king of Israel? Send him out, or send any man out. And it'll be me against him, and if I win, then you'll become our slaves. But if you guys win, if he wins, then you'll become our slaves. And King Saul, who should have been the guy who was out there defending his people, he is dismayed, it says, and all of his army with him. They were afraid at the great size of Goliath. They were afraid at his equipment, too. The Philistines were known to have far superior metalworking. And in fact, at one point, Israel had to go to the Philistines to get metal weapons. And these guys are their enemies. So I'm sure that was an awkward economic and political situation at the time. But the great point is that Goliath had the spear, he had the shield, he had the sword, he had the armor, and David didn't have anything. But he goes to King Saul and he says, have you heard what Goliath is saying? He is defying our armies. He is defying the Lord, it says. What's going to happen for the guy that defeats Goliath? And they say, well, he's gonna get prizes from King Saul. He's gonna be married into the royal family, that kind of thing. And David is asking around, and he doesn't care if people hear his questions because he's saying, well, why isn't anybody going to fight him? This guy is defying the Lord, and don't we trust in the Lord? Don't we trust that the Lord is our strength? And of course, he had centuries of Israelite history to base that on. And evidently, he was the only one who had that faith, which is very important to note because David was the one who last week, and in fact, it was the chapter previous to this chapter in the Bible where he was anointed. He would be the king of Israel. And this is the moment at which really he displaces King Saul for the first time. So he goes up to Goliath with 5 smooth stones that he got from the brook, and he says, Goliath, you have defied the living God. And I will defeat you today in the name of the Lord. And he gives him more threats. And Goliath, what does it say? It says Goliath cursed David by his gods. And so we've got ourselves not just a battle between two armies, not just a battle between two champions of those armies, but a battle of gods. And I believe that's what we're seeing out in the world today. There is a battle of gods at work. And there is a true God, and there are false gods. There are demons. There are figments of people's imagination. And they are all running the lives of people. And they put themselves out there as the God who will defeat your God. And let's just find out which God wins, right? Let's find out which God wins. David This is Old Testament days, and God was always doing this kind of thing in the Old Testament history. He was always demonstrating that when it came to contests of warfare, the true God would win miraculously, oftentimes. And in this case, it was a miraculous thing. David says to King Saul, "You can send me out there because the Lord has equipped me to kill lions and kill bears and kill wolves in the service of being a shepherd. So the Lord who has released me from the power of the paw of the lion will release me from the power of this Philistine. So send me out." Now in the New Testament, let me ask you, is God doing that anymore? Is God winning military battles for the sake of his name, for the sake of a people who call on his name? The answer is not so much. He has not promised to do that. He promised to do that in the case of the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. But now something has changed. Do you know what it is? It's the arrival of Jesus Christ. With the arrival of Jesus Christ, the main battle for supremacy as for who is God has been decisively announced. The victory has been decisively announced in Jesus Christ's death and resurrection. And so, what does Jesus say you can expect in your life? Are you going to be backed up by God? Yes. Are you going to be backed up by God to win every victory against your enemies? Well, not in the same way that he did so in the Old Testament. God is at business right now, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians, showing his power through weakness. He allows you to be defeated for the sake of his glory. And so we're in a different time. We are in a different time now than King David was. Not because God is different, not because the faith of God is different, but because he is teaching the world in a different way. Many commentators have taught about this. I like how Augustine says. Augustine talked about sort of there's the seed, and then through time, then the plant arises out of the seed, and it comes to full flower. Well, in the Old Testament days, you maybe had the seed, and what the people needed to know then was God, that God was the creator and the majestic Prince of heaven and earth, and that you could trust on him in all times of danger, even in the context of warfare, and he would win. Right now, God has released himself from attachment to one particular people, Israel. God is not merely the God of Israel. He is the God of the Samaritans and the Edomites and all the ends of the earth. He has revealed himself to all nations by the proclamation of Jesus Christ. Now, things have begun to grow and to blossom. And he's teaching us his power through weakness, through the cross, through death, through suffering, through self-denial. Both of these things are God. But there comes a season in life where we must experience both. Where are you in that? I'm not going to ask, are you David or Goliath? Because Jesus is David. That's probably a good place to end up. David is Jesus in this story, in that way. Jesus defeats the devil and wins a victory for all of us. Let's go ahead and say goodbye for now. We'll talk to you later. Have a blessed